Hey, welcome to Sent From Above, and we're your hosts, Ewan and Joash.
Hey, Ewan, I feel like you actually might have done that wrong, so let me reintroduce us. This is the Sent From Above podcast with your hosts, Joash, Ewan, and Jesus. I like that better.
Well, that works, I guess. Anyway, in this podcast, we have all different types of messages and some very special guests to talk about breaking into kingdom culture and exploring the heart of God.
And we invite you guys to join in on the conversation. This is Sent From Above. Call 1-800-588-2300-EMPIRE today.
Welcome to the Sent From Above podcast.
Welcome to the Sent From Above podcast. I am your host, Joash Rushton.
And I am Ewan Erickson.
Hi, Ewan.
Hey, Joash.
How's your week going?
It's
Good.
pretty good.
Good, other than the fact that we've had to re-record this now.
Yeah, it's okay.
That's okay. It's beautiful. It's wonderful.
It's beautiful. It's just the Lord showing us perseverance, and
And
He
patience.
said it would be hard.
He said it would be hard. He wasn't kidding.
So, guys, welcome this week. I'm so happy that you guys can come. It's been quite the week for everyone, I think. Coming into Easter time, it has been pretty awesome, I think, personally. Had some awesome times to commune with others. I still hate Easter chocolate.
It's not good.
I verbally explained that to my family that
Yep.
I cannot stand it personally. I will take one bite and be like, man, this is a beautiful looking like Ferrero Rocher bunny. Or I think the Ferrero Rocher thing was this Ferrero Rocher squirrel. This year.
Yep.
Easter squirrel.
Easter squirrel, because
I ate squirrel in Africa, but it's just or like and I just eat it and I'll be like, oh man, like this is not what God designed for me to do.
Well, I'm not trying to offend anybody out there right now, but I'm not gonna lie to you. Every time there's like an Easter like rabbit hunt or like an egg hunt, rabbit hunt. There's like an Easter egg hunt, or it's like, oh, it's Easter, time to get the bunnies out. I'm like, Jesus literally was crucified. Why are we doing this?
Oh my God.
That's just my opinion, though. But it's interesting, actually, a big theme, both in my life, personally, my church's life, my own heart, my own convictions. The Lord's been speaking to me very, very much about the truth and the nature of communion.
Yeah.
And what it means to actually sit at the table of the Lord and commune with Him. And that's kind of what we're going to get into this week on the podcast, is what it really means to be a partaking of communion.
Yeah, how do we go from communing to communion? That's, I think, what we're going to call this podcast is.
I thought we were going to call it flesh eaters and blood drinkers.
That was V1.
Version 1 of this podcast.
Title making experience with Ewan and Joash.
Flesh eaters and blood
You
drinkers.
can kind of see where our minds go there.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's awesome. I think that God gave us creativity for a reason, honestly.
Not for that reason.
So what we're going to be talking about is really being able to commune with Jesus.
Yep.
Going from communing to actually partaking in not just the elements, but His sacrifice for us. Because that's what the sacrifice actually is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is eating His flesh and drinking His blood. In a spiritual sense. We don't actually eat His flesh, His physical flesh. Like, that's be cannibalism, honestly.
Somebody actually asked me, not me, my dad, actually. They asked my dad, and they said, so just that you're a Christian, right? And he goes, yes, I am. And they said, when you take communion, do you really believe that the bread turns to flesh and the wine turns to blood? My dad was like, no. Not literally. Spiritually, maybe. And I'd like to give a huge shout out to Abundant Springs Community Church here in Pincher Creek for sponsoring the podcast for the next year. That's super awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, that was something that we have had in our prayers for ever since we really started this, was being able to keep it on all platforms. It's important for us not just to have it on YouTube. If we're going to do something, we want to be able to do it well. Something that Bethel Church in Reading actually is really one of their statements for going out into the industry, because they really believe, and I think that all Christians should take this on too, is actually being able to go out in your work position and do your job well and be an influence for the kingdom in that position.
Show excellency and stuff.
And by doing this podcast for us, we want to be able to show our creativity that God has given to us. And we want to be able to show it as best as we can.
So we really, really appreciate, bless you, Pastor Stephen, for giving us the opportunity to actually do that to the best of our ability. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
So good. But anyway, let's get on with the podcast today.
Yeah, for sure. I know, I'll start out with this. I think a lot of the reason that the Western countries, they can't, not that they can't, but they don't really see the fullness of communion, or they miss the fullness of communion, is really just our culture around eating, right? Like we never eat together very often. If we do, it's in front of the TV. The kitchen table has honestly became kind of a glorified shelf to just stack stuff on, but you were just in Africa for a month, and I know the culture of eating there, like together as a family especially, is so dramatically different than here.
Yeah. In Africa, it's if you don't eat with somebody, you can go without eating for days because you don't have people to eat with. One of the teams in a different country than ours had one of their leaders, who was an African, not eat for 3 days because he didn't have a chance to actually eat with his team, with the people on his team. And he's like, well, you haven't been eating. What's up? Oh, I haven't had a chance to eat with you yet. Can we go get some food? Like, honestly, like, that's what it is. And in North America, it's just, pick up your plate. Mom made roast beef and mashed potatoes, or not even. You
Slap
got
a hungry man in the microwave.
Yeah, hungry man in the microwave, skip the dishes. You don't really get that in Pincher Creek here, but, like.
Shout out Drift Delivery.
Drift Delivery. Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yeah. And you get your takeout, you get your whatever, and then you go and binge watch YouTube, whatever it is. Or maybe you don't even do that. Maybe you just sit by yourself. We have gotten out of the cultural aspect of eating together. And that has had a decimating destruction. Double whammy there, decimating destruction on the element of communion. Because communion is meant to be, guess what? Taken together by communing with others. It's not just, if it was just about eating food, Jesus would just call it supper.
Yeah. Well, all throughout the Old Testament, when God was giving his commands for the feasts, the festivals, the traditions, whatever, he would always give the command. It was always eat together, eat with your family. Even in the Passover, he said, get your households together and eat. And then that was reflected at the Last Supper when they were celebrating the Passover and they were all together. So I think it's just a picture of actually sitting down purposefully with the Lord, eating with him, speaking with him.
Now, for the whole entire time where me and Joash are chatting here, I really want you guys to get something. And we're going to relate this to every single thing we talk about, basically. There's two aspects to eating together. There's two aspects to communing. There's two aspects to everything that we're going to be talking about today, basically. In Africa, let me just kind of make this clear. In the cultural eating, there's two aspects to the cultural eating. One, you get your nourishment. You get the bread. Man, this is so good. Like, I'm full. This is delicious. Delicious
stomach
food.
All filled up.
Thanks, Mama. That was a delicious supper, And you go on your way. But there's also another aspect of that, and I think both are equally valuable. You also get to talk with people. That's something to do with in Africa. It's like a half and half. Okay, I get to go eat, but I also get to spend time with friends and family. I also get to talk with them, hear how their day went. And simply, I think, the whole idea of communion has been so blown up. In a good way. A lot of it has stuff to do, like, we always go to the end. We always make, like a means to an end. Like, it's just purity from the blood of Jesus. The wine is the purity. The bread is the life. It's so good. And we get so caught up in all of the, quite frank, amazing outcomes of communion.
Yeah, there is an infinite depth of communion, but I think sometimes in search for that infinite depth, we actually miss the very simplistic aspect of communing with the Lord.
Just being with him.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's really what it is. It wouldn't be called communion if it was anything else.
Well, and I know in Africa, like, again, going back to the cultural difference, I've heard, and Shay's told me as well, like, here, when you meet with somebody, it's, hi, how are you? I'm good, how are you? Good, it's been good. All right, cool, have a good day. Whereas in Africa, it's, if you make that initial contact of, hey, how are you? It's, how's your family? How's your job? How are your kids? And they're actually very interested in your life, especially over dinner. It's not just small talk. Even if you go into a stranger's house to eat, it's never just small talk. It's actually like, we really care about your life. Let's hear about your life. And I think that's kind of poignant
That's always why they ask about your family. How's your family doing? How's your job going? How's your time in Africa? They actually genuinely care about you. I've had so many people from Africa that I've said that even guys are like, I love you so much. And it's just their culture. That's what it is. It's like, yeah, they actually, like, though sometimes I think they're over exaggerating. Some of them are like, man, I love you. You're everything. I don't think that I'm everything to them, but like they do genuinely love me because
but it's showing honor and love.
Yeah. It is. It's really what it is. And I love them back for it. Honestly, that's what it is.
But I think, first, and I'll shoot this one over to you. Before we really get into the aspect of eating at the table, I think we really need to establish what the table is. Because it's not just, like you just made a point, the Bible doesn't say they went into the building and ate at a table. It says they went and they ate at the table.
Yeah, I was reading in John that too. It wasn't like they just sat, like, yeah, it might have been some random table. But the table was not just a table. It was actually a deep spiritual metaphor for the table that Jesus sets out for us, that he mentioned in Psalms so many times and all throughout the Bible, quite honestly, is this table that's set out for us. And the food that's on the table, yeah, there might be some other food, but the most important food is his blood and his body set out for us. That table that I think that you just were talking about, that we're just going to talk about here, is kind of the foundation of communion. You need somewhere to eat. What's the setting of you? Are you in some grungy, disgusting part of town? Are you in the desert? Where are you? But wherever you are, he sets out a table for you.
He prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies.
Mm-hmm. The table is the setting of communion. It is kind of like where everything is prepared. It's where everything is placed in front of you. It's kind of the place where you make your choice. Do I follow Jesus or not? Do I partake with Jesus or not?
Well, that was the choice he gave the other disciples when there were 70 of them or whatever, is he said, I'm glad that you went out and you did many signs and wonders and miracles, but in order to truly follow me, you have to drink my blood and eat my flesh, which didn't make any sense to most of them, but you got guys like Peter and James and John that were like, all right, I'm in. I'm not going to ask any questions about that. But I think what you added that was really, it's really life-changing to really look at is the fact that he prepared a table. You know, it's not just a random table. It's a table that he picked. He laid out the cutlery, the plates, you know, with a wedding. Like, we're trying to prepare for our wedding in the middle of this corona thing, which is a mess. But when you prepare for a wedding, at the tables you have names, right? You've set the tables, you prepared the tables for your guests specifically. And I think it's crazy that Jesus has set a table with every single person in the history of the universe's name, by name. I think it's amazing.
Yeah. Michael, Joash's brother, said something really crazy. I think it's really stuck with me and Joash, and I can't stop going back to it. But he said one night, he said, the kingdom of God has many rooms, but not everyone knows that they have one or they have a key. They don't know that they have that. Every single person has a place at the table. Some people just don't know they have one.
Well, I think that brings us to our next kind of section that we wanted to talk about is the different kinds of people that are involved with communion.
Yeah, because there's the table, beautiful place,
and
to
that's
sit.
set by Jesus.
Yeah, and it's free. It's like I said, it's an open concept, open table concept,
Open concept.
Yeah,
architecture.
It's always been a trend.
It's not just for modern homes.
It's for everyone. It's for everyone. When the table was set, all nations were able to come and eat with Jesus. It wasn't just Jews. It wasn't just Gentiles. It was everyone is able to come and eat. And that's very important, I think. And when we get to the table's the first thing. It's set. Now it's the person who has to come up to the table. Josh, why don't you just kind of talk about maybe some of the people because there's different people that will come to the table. It's not like every single person's a robot and they'll come up and sit at the table. I think that there's different kinds of people that will come up to the table.
Well, one of the most profound statements I've ever heard in my life, actually I heard this last week. There's been a lot that revolves around communion the last week, but somebody said the gift of freedom also brought the responsibility of choice. So when freedom was given, when Jesus set the table, it actually made it so we have to make a choice, right? Like in the old covenant, it was you were either a Jew or you weren't. Now with the table set for everyone, we now have the choice. And I think that what happens there is it kind of, that option of choice divides people because it separates people into groups of what they're willing to choose or what they decide on. And I think there's the one type of person when the table is set who they're outside the house, the door might be open a crack or the window might be open and they're peering in from the outside. They don't actually want to step into the building. They don't want to go even into where the table is or where the meal is. They're just looking from outside. And the Bible kind of describes those people as cold. The cold ones who they won't even take the step into the house to even see the table prepared. I think a lot of times what happens with these people is, because you can look at it two ways. You can look at it as in the church and outside the church, right? Outside of the church, these are the people who haven't made the decision to seek the Lord yet. Now, inside the church, these would kind of be the people that they show up maybe on 1 or 2 Sundays a year, 3 Sundays a year, and they look in, but they never actually make an effort to be anything more than somebody who's just looking inward at what's going on.
Now, this week I heard an amazing sermon. It's from a man who actually just a few years ago passed away.
It's from a man.
It is from a man. He passed away a few years ago. He was 33 years old. He was actually one of Ravi Zacharias' a great friend of his. I think his name was Nabil Kirshai, I've totally butchered his name. But anyway, he was a Muslim who had a radical transformation to Jesus, had dreams and visions, and had a huge, long process of transferring to Jesus from Islam. Now, the thing is with him, there came a time when there was a choice for him, and I think this is a perfect picture. He had this dream one night that he was standing in the doorway that was perfectly his size. It was just wide enough and just tall enough for him to enter in. And when he was going to enter in the room, his best friend stood in front of him, blocking him from getting in the room. And his best friend was the one who was trying to lead him to Jesus. And he was the one who initially gave him the invitation to go and commune at the table. And there was like this huge table. He could see this huge table with everyone. There was tons of people at the table. And when he went to the door, "Why are you blocking the door, David? Why are you blocking the door, David?" Dave said, "You haven't accepted my invitation yet." And that's what these people are, is they haven't accepted the invitation yet. Whether they are thinking about it or whether they haven't even answered or don't even know they have an invitation. That's particularly what a cold person is like, is they haven't even entered into the room yet. Now, there's another kind of person. It's the person. Get this. Many of you might remember this from Revelations chapter 2 to 3. I love talking about Revelation.
First year Bible school student.
Yeah, I still am.
Yikes.
Yeah, I love it. Pastor hates it, but Pastor Stephen.
Shut up again.
This other person, the second person that we're going to talk about. The first one is the cold people. The second one is a person who will come into the room, accept the invitation, sit at the table, and they may not really eat the food. Or they may just talk with Jesus and not actually eat the food. They can either eat the food and not talk with Jesus, maybe even pick up their plate and go into the corner by themselves. Doesn't even want anything to do with that. Or they could not even eat their food and just speak to Jesus. Just talking to him, big grocery lists of things that they need, and they don't even, maybe they're seeking a relationship with him, but it's difficult sometimes, you know. Now, this isn't the case for every single person, but in the Bible, what we call these people lukewarm people who haven't really accepted the full thing, right? They're not putting their full effort into the experience with Jesus.
They're either looking for the... Don't get me wrong, I love experience. I love feeling the Lord, but they're either looking for the warm fuzzies, or they are, you know, they're also the people who maybe they just read their Bible, 12 hours a day. But if you were to ask them who Jesus is, they couldn't really give you an answer because they've been devouring and devouring and devouring, but they haven't seen his face in any of it. And I think that what happens is with these people, they enter into the room, they see Jesus, he's irresistible, they come and they sit at the table, and they look around. And I think, especially with the seeing and talking to him but not eating, is I think that they see him and they want to talk to him, right? And that's just a back and forth conversation. But when it comes to actually actively making the decision, oh wait, I have to actually partake in this food, that's when it's like, okay, I don't want to do that because that's either too much responsibility or it's even too much to handle, or they just don't want to, because they know, here's my perspective. When you speak to him and then partake of the food, that's the point of no return. You can go in and feel the warm fuzzies and come out of that and live your own life. But if you want to do both, that's the point of no return. Now, you said something one time that was actually, it seems a little controversial to say, but you had mentioned the fact that people who either go to the table and don't eat, or the people who go to the table, commune, put the food in their mouth and then spit it out and don't actually consume it. The Lord spoke to you one time and said that that's actually like a spiritual eating disorder.
Yeah, it's weird. Now that is a very strong statement, and a lot of people will hate that statement, honestly. But don't get us wrong. We're not talking about you actually, we're not actually talking about a physical eating disorder here. This is just a metaphor for people who don't partake in his sacrifice. Did you know that when you sit at the table and don't eat the food, you reject Jesus' sacrifice? You may talk with him, you may pray to him, but if you don't reside in his sacrifice and eat his bread and his wine, his body and his blood, you reject his sacrifice. Now, it may take a person a while to actually get to the point of eating. That's okay. But when you say, I'm not really hungry, I don't really want to eat this, or maybe you take a bite and you spit it out. I don't like this. It tastes too bitter.
Mm-hmm. It's too gruesome. It's too bitter. It doesn't taste great. It looks awesome, but when I actually go to partake, it tastes bitter. It doesn't taste as good as I thought it was going to taste.
And the people who the people who just eat the food reside in the sacrifice, but they don't look at Jesus, they're missing out on the resurrection.
Amen.
They're missing out on the person who Jesus is now. He's not just Jesus of Nazareth anymore. He's Jesus, King of the universe now. You know, he always has been, but now it's Jesus the Christ.
Exactly. I was gonna say one of my closest friends, Ethan. He shout out Ethan. He always says, the man Jesus of Nazareth died, and Jesus the Christ, the resurrected King, rose out from the grave. And I think that, like you were saying, actually I was praying probably 6 months ago, and I was asking the Lord, like, what can I offer? What's going on? I was looking at the church and I was wondering, like, why are so many of us at that state of sitting at the table, maybe even talking with the Lord, but none of us are partaking in his body? And the Lord said, because too many of my children identify in my death, and too many of my children identify in my death, not enough of my children identify in my resurrection. And that was really powerful. And that brings us to the third person, the person who sits down and takes the invitation from God, speaks to him, learns his heart. And when he says, this is my blood that was shed for you, this is my body that was broken, take, eat, and drink, they say, absolutely. And they drink the wine and they eat the bread and they identify in that sacrifice.
Yeah. This is the kind of person that any churchgoer, any Christian needs to set their sights on. If you set your sights on just eating the food, you're setting your sights too low. If you're setting your sights on just talking with Jesus and not partaking, you're setting your sights too low. We need to set our sights on literally as soon as we get into that heavenly banquet hall, which is right now. It's not just when we get to heaven. Right now, we can partake with Jesus. Right now. We can reside in his sacrifice. You know, we can right now. We need to strive to be the person that locks eyes first with Jesus. And when Jesus points to our seat, we need to run. Run. Get there. I'm so excited to receive my nourishment from him, which would be good enough.
Which that would be fine and dandy.
Even if we didn't even get any food, that would be good enough.
Just the invite alone is worth 1,000 million eternities of worship.
Literally, even if I was to be a servant wrapped with sackcloth, serving people, never even partaking, that would be good enough because I'd be in the presence of God. That would be good enough. But he gives us his nourishment and he gives us his conversation. Now, this is what I was talking about with the cultural eating. There's two aspects to cultural eating. There's two aspects to communion. There is eating, receiving your spiritual nourishment, and taking in the sacrifice. There is also speaking with the risen Lord. Not the dead Lord, the risen Lord. That's what this entire Easter season is all about. Even though it's a little bit past Easter now, it's still just as powerful. Me and Josh were actually talking about this, talking about whether the Passover is for today. Are we supposed to still do the same things all the time? We're supposed to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. We were just chatting about that, and Jesus was really just downloading our stuff. Maybe, Josh, you can just talk about that quick.
Yeah, here's the thing. So I think that a big misconception is that the Last Supper was just a dinner that they were having, but it wasn't. They were actually celebrating Passover. So it was actually the day before Christ died, they began celebrating the Passover, the week of the Passover. And that's why they were having the unleavened bread and they were drinking the wine. It was a celebration of Passover. And I think what's super amazing about that is we all know that Passover and the Exodus out of Egypt was a type and shadow of salvation. Egypt was a type of sin, and the Passover was, the prophetic picture of Christ coming and being shed, and the blood being posted over the doorpost, all that stuff. That's all great, but I think that what Christ was trying to tell his disciples is this is the beginning of a new Passover. A Passover that He looked at them and said, "This is my blood, which is the New Testament." The Old Testament was the Passover. That's actually where the law began. That was where the journey to becoming the Old Testament began, was with Moses and the Exodus out of Egypt. And Jesus said, "This is my blood. This is the New Testament." And so he was saying, don't change the fact that you're celebrating. Now, I'm not saying eat unleavened bread for 7 days, but I'm saying celebrate. That's why he said, do this in remembrance of me. Because he was saying, from this point forward, this isn't a celebration to represent your exodus from Egypt. This is an invitation to all nations to come sit at the table and feast and remember and celebrate your exodus from sin and from your old life.
Yeah, the reason why I bring this point up, the reason why I just kind of talk about this is the kind of person we need to strive to be. This person, if you're striving to be this person, which I think all of us should be. Me and Joash, we strive. It's hard, but this person strives to be in communion with Jesus every day. Celebrating Passover is not just for Easter. Oh, of course, like I specifically do celebrate Passover at Easter time. I think it's important, celebrate. But technically, when you eat his body and you drink his blood, the elements, you technically remember that second, almost, Passover lamb slain before the foundations of the world. Every day, every time you take communion.
The spotless, bloodied Lamb of God displayed at the intersection of the busiest streets in Jerusalem. And I heard somebody say one time that when Jesus died at twilight, think about this, when Christ died around twilight, would have been almost to the minute that Jewish families all over Jerusalem were slaughtering their family lamb for Passover. And so as Christ was saying, "It is finished," there was an echoing sound throughout Jerusalem of lambs crying out. And still somehow they missed the picture. I think that it's a strong statement, but I think we both would say we both feel passionate enough about the truth of communion to make it. And that is, you had said the other day, like, when you don't partake of communion, and you don't actually partake, not just the elements, but of communing with the Lord, when you don't partake of his body and his blood, you actually have nothing to do with, and you don't identify yourself in the death and resurrection of who he was and who he is.
Well, you identify with worldly food. You don't identify with godly food. You identify with blood and with water that runs out. That's what you identify yourself with. You do not identify yourself with the bread of life.
The living water.
You don't. You just don't. And when you don't drink that cup, when you just drink worldly wine, you just get drunk.
Mm-hmm.
When you drink godly wine from the side of Jesus,
you enter into a New Testament.
Yeah, you enter into everything that he has for you. You identify with his resurrection and his death on the cross. And when you don't, you just identify with the world.
And that's not to say, and I think that this is where a lot of people get tripped up, because in the people that sit and don't actually partake, you can feel his life. You can feel his life emanating off of him, and it gets onto you. And I think a lot of people settle there. They go, "Oh, this is what the Christian life is," and it's not. You can feel his life because he's there. And you can. It's like when you're in a great worship service, you can feel the presence of God. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily partaking in his presence. I love what Bill Johnson, with his wonderful statements that just wreck you to your core. He said, anyone can sing songs about being a friend of God. That doesn't make you a friend of God.
Yeah.
I was like, you're right, man. And I think as believers, for too long we become satisfied with just feeling that life, feeling that presence, and not actually partaking of the presence. And that's a different thing, is actually receiving his life versus just feeling his life.
It's like he sets a plate out in front of you. Fresh bread. like a fresh meal in front of you. Like there was other things at the Passover meal. It wasn't just bread, right? Like he broke the bread at the beginning, then there was more food that came, and then they drank the wine at the end. So he puts out this fresh baked bread, delicious. Whatever bread it is, I don't care what it is. If it's unleavened, if it's baguette, if it's a croissant,
Bread is bread, man.
Whatever it is, just imagine your favorite bread put out in front of you.
To any of you guys who have gluten allergies, we will pray for you.
We will.
You are missing out.
When you have that fresh bread in front of you, you can hold it warm. It's, oh man, like for anybody who's like held just a fresh baked bun, oh man, it's crazy. It's good. I love baking bread. I need to show Joash because he doesn't have any idea how to make it.
I made unleavened bread for communion. I mean, it's literally just flour and water.
That's tier 1 bread.
Tier 1. I need to upgrade.
You can hold bread. Oh, there's nothing better than holding it, really. Like, it's just like, this is good. It's warm, and then you smell it.
Oh, and the smell.
It's great. Like, it's just like fresh bread. It's really simple. It's not like it's like this delicious, extravagant meal. It's just fresh bread. It's something so simple about it. And then you can feel and you can smell and you can see it. You can see it, but if all you do is look at it, smell it, and all you do is feel it, and you don't partake in it, you don't receive it. You do not receive the gift.
Well, and I think the hardest part is this. This is the hardest pill to swallow. Remember how we talked about sometimes it tastes bitter.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you spit it out because it tastes bitter. But the truth is you can't receive. You can feel his life, but you can't receive his life until you first partake in his death.
Yeah, and you can put a bottle of wine on your shelf for 10 years.
It's cool. You can brag about it to your friends.
Look at this. Look, this bottle of wine is, 2020 years old. Like this is a long time. It's like this is going to be delicious when I open it up one day. You can put some bread on your shelf. Man, look at this. It's beautiful bread. But slowly, like until you actually eat it and until you actually drink it, like what's going on? Like you're not actually partaking in it. You put it on the shelf. That's what a lot of people do. And this isn't just the whole church. Like this is just some people in the church. Is just you put the sacrifice on the shelf. You know it. You look at the sacrifice, but you don't partake in the sacrifice. Now, these people that we're kind of talking about, these are the people that we need to strive for, is not the person who just puts it on the shelf, puts the sacrifice on the shelf. Hey, that's really cool. I just watched The Passion of the Christ this Easter, and I cried a little bit. Of course, I cry. I can't contain myself when I watch it. But, it was cool. I really liked it. Yeah, it's awesome. Go back to every day, whatever. But it's just this whole time right now, every day, not just Easter, but every day, that we need to be the person who actually partakes.
Well, I want you to think about this. The Lord literally just dropped this in my head. The Old Testament says that new wine cannot be poured into old wineskins, for the wineskin will tear, and you will lose the wine. When Christ gave the Last Supper and prophesied of the life to come, he said, "This is my body first." He said, you have to identify with my broken and killed body and my resurrected body. Be a part of that, because the Bible says he died as us, not just for us, as us. He took our place. We died and were resurrected in him. But watch this. This is so cool. The Lord literally just showed me this. We had to receive the new wineskin before we could receive the new wine, because he said, this is the wine. This is my blood. That is the New Testament. So he was saying you have to partake to even receive the new wine. And we all know that wine throughout Scripture is always representative of, well, almost always, it's always representative of the outpouring of the Spirit and being blessed with the gift of the Spirit, or even just the Holy Spirit in general. I think it's so important that he said, not only are you have to be invited to the table, not only do you have to sit down, not only do you have to talk with me, but you have to partake. and identifying my death and resurrection to receive the New Testament,
Yeah.
the New Covenant.
And a lot of people will be like, me and Josh were talking about this earlier. Don't drink or eat the bread unworthily, or you will, you drink and eat damnation on yourself. Now, this is a really big part of some people's experience with communion. There's some people that go in so scared to partake in communion.
Because they're like, oh man, if I did anything wrong,
if
it's over for
if
me.
I accidentally broke this cracker, or I didn't drink all the juice, or I only drank part of the juice, I don't know if that's for some people, but when I was a kid, that was what it was for me. Like, I need to do this right.
It was for me, it was like, if I opened my eyes by accident during the prayer and I drink this, I'm unworthy,
and some people go in with that fear. Some people go in with no anything.
Mm-hmm. That's just one of those things you do as a Christian.
Yeah, and this isn't every Christian. Don't get us wrong. Like this, me and Joash even do this sometimes. Like sometimes we'll be, man, I'm really tired on Sunday, and I just eat the cracker and drink the juice, and I don't even think twice about it. Now, is that right?
No,
not at all. Because we need to strive to be the person who is in communion. Is literally, it's not a difficult thing. But the Last Supper gives us the perfect picture of what someone is, who drinks and eats the damnation of himself. Look at Judas. Me and Joash were just talking about this, but Judas, he was offered it. He was
first.
Yeah, literally. he was offered the bread and the wine, and Jesus even washed his feet.
Even after it was explained what it was.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what's really crazy about that is the scripture. We love to quote, he who drinks unworthily drinks or eats damnation unto himself. But we don't quote the next part. It says, he who eats or drinks unworthily eats or drinks damnation unto himself, not discerning the Lord's body. And what's so important about that is communion is identifying in what the Lord's body and blood was. And discerning the body is looking at the picture of Christ and what he did, understanding it, and accepting it. Paul wasn't saying, if you eat or drink and have any unconfessed sin, you're going to hell. He was actually saying the opposite. Look at the people who are around the table at the Last Supper. Like you just said, Judas. Judas had literally already made the deal with the Pharisees to turn Jesus in and betray him. Like he'd been paid for it. Like that, like it was done. And yet still after that, Jesus knew it and said, I'm going to wash your feet and I'm going to offer you this cup. So it can't have to do, because Paul said in the same manner that Christ did it, you do it. So it can't have to do with having sin in your life or doing something wrong. Because Peter was going to deny him. James and John were fierily angry people. So it can't have to do with that. What it can have to do with is what Judas did, and that's not discerning the Lord's body. Judas just ate and drank it and betrayed the Lord's body because he gave it up. He didn't actually partake of it. Partaking is identifying and accepting, this is what my body was broken for. This is what my blood was poured out for. And the Bible actually says that when Judas took, he ate and he drank, that's when the devil entered him and he left. He left the group because that was him drinking and eating without discerning the Lord's
because
body.
he'd already given up the body.
Yep.
Like he'd already
he'd given it up.
Yeah,
he'd given up the body. He wasn't accepting the body.
Yeah, and the thing is that he basically sat at the table, looked at Jesus, like imagine this in the spirit at the wedding feast. Judas sits down in his spot, takes the bread, looks at Jesus with fierce eyes, and eats. And it gets up, leaves. It just he doesn't actually stay.
Well, I think the thing is the biggest verse after that is it says, many of you are weak or sickly or even die because you don't discern the Lord's body. And I think that's because Paul is saying this is actually what the Lord's body was broken for. Those among you who are weak, sick, or dying, that's what the Lord's body was broken for, and that's what his blood was poured out for. And not discerning it is not accepting that. So he's saying by not accepting what the body and blood were for, you're automatically eating and drinking damnation unto yourself because you're not partaking in what it was given for.
Yeah, that's good. Well,
we could talk about communion for hours.
Oh, so long. It's a great topic, but I think that's all the time that we have tonight, guys. Join us next Sunday at 1 p.m. Facebook. We're on all major platforms now: Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcast. We're all over the place
YouTube,
now.
Facebook.
All thanks to Abundant Springs.
Thanks, guys, again,
so
thanks
so much.
If I could leave you with one encouraging word, it would be the one who partakes of the Lord's body and the Lord's blood and communes with him and speaks with him.
It's not too difficult, guys. It's not something that is so far out of reach. Jesus is closer than our skin. He's closer than our breath. Communing with him is so close.
It's intimate.
It's so close.
It's an invitation, not an exclusion.
Yeah, it's just accept the invitation. And yeah, so we'll leave you with that, guys.
Bless you guys.
Bless you guys so much.
Tune in next week. We love you guys. Adios.
Amigos.
Amigos.